Hey kiddos, so you guys took a test last Friday and it covered Presidents Monroe through Jackson. And once Mr. Bender and Mrs. Lopez and I looked through all of the test questions and your grades and everything, what we realized is that the questions that you guys missed the most all had to do with Andrew Jackson. So today's reteach is going to be focused just on a couple of Andrew Jackson topics. The reteach is being posted on Friday afternoon of January 25th. You are to watch it over the weekend. Your retest options are as follows. You may retest with Mrs. Lopez Monday after school in her room. You may retest on Tuesday morning with Mr. Bender. You may retest with Mrs. Countryman or Mr. Bender on Wednesday morning. And you may retest Wednesday afternoon with Mrs. Lopez. If one of those 4 times does not work with you, maybe you're an athlete or something like that, please come see us so we can make arrangements for you to come in at a different time. All right, so let's just talk about what we are going to call the Jacksonian democracy. And the whole presidency of Andrew Jackson is called the Jacksonian democracy, of course we know, because Andrew Jackson is the one who began the modern Democratic Party. Well, what the heck does that mean? Remember, democratic is just coming from the word democracy, and you guys know that democracy means a government run by the people. So Andrew Jackson's whole big thing is get the everyday people involved. You have to remember, before Andrew Jackson comes around, in order to participate in politics, you have to be, as Mr. Bender would say, a wasblom, a white Anglo-Saxon male who owns property, and basically that means you are educated and rich. And to be honest, our founding fathers were really nervous about the regular, everyday, non-educated people being allowed to vote. They thought that they might be too stupid to make good choices. And Andrew Jackson, as you know, came from poverty. He was an orphan, and he's basically the self-made man. He's the one who read all the law books on his own, and was able to become a lawyer without ever even attending university. So he is the common man. He is the everyday guy. And so by the time he gets into politics, his big push is for the poor people, or in other words, the non-landowning people, to be able to be a part of politics. Okay, so Jacksonian democracy includes the common man. One step he took to include the common man was to increase suffrage. What do we mean by that? Suffrage just means the right to vote. So how did he do that? He allowed all white males to vote instead of only the land-owning males. Now, I know what you're thinking. Big deal. What about the women and the minorities? Hello. But, guys, to allow non-property owners to vote increased the number of people who could vote by 4 times. Okay? 4 times as many people were able to vote just by taking that one qualification out. So he is for the common man by allowing more people to vote. He's also for the common man by implementing the spoils system. Let's go back. The spoils system is when the president, once they are elected, is allowed to go through and appoint friends and political supporters, loyal people to his campaign, into those cabinet positions. And we talked a lot about how that's not always the most brilliant plan, because you could get some unqualified people in there, and how it does seem a little bit self-serving, because of course you want your friends and your supporters in your cabinet, because they're going to help you get your ideas passed along. They're going to help you get your plans going. However, why did he really want to do this? Was it really only to get people that would agree with him? No. It was to get those common everyday people involved in politics that he knows would have never been elected by the wealthy, educated people. Instead, he's appointing them into these positions. So remember, Andrew Jackson's presidency is the time of the Jacksonian democracy, and all that really means is he's the creator of the modern Democratic Party, and that he is basically increasing suffrage, allowing the common man to participate in politics by creating the spoils system. All right, so the last thing you guys seem to struggle with Andrew Jackson is actually not a new concept. You'll remember this from when we learned about Alexander Hamilton under George Washington's presidency when he created the system of protective tariffs. So this should be a little bit of a review. And so basically we've got protective tariffs, once again, just like Hamilton, which makes imported goods more expensive by placing a tax or tariff on them. So if you look at the image on the left, what we're saying here is, in this example, that the American-made cloth is $4 a roll, which is exactly the same price as the British cloth. So how are we going to make sure that people are buying the American product rather than the British product? Because we know that if Americans are buying American-made products and all of the money stays inside of our country, that it boosts our economy. Well, the only way we can do that is to make the British product, the import, less appealing by making it more expensive. So you'll see they've added a tariff as the import comes over. And so now the price for the British cloth is $5. So of course you would buy the cheaper one, the $4 one. So Andrew Jackson implements a tariff when he comes into office. And the reason this becomes a big deal is that South Carolina decides, you know what? I don't want to pay this tariff. You'll remember that the North didn't mind tariffs at all because, of course, that's where the factories are. So they're the ones actually benefiting in the long run because their businesses are making money. The South still likes to buy imported goods and still trades quite frequently with Great Britain for their agricultural needs. So it actually was hurting South Carolina to have more protective tariffs. And so South Carolina decides they want to do something about it. And you're going to remember that Andrew Jackson's vice president, his name was John C. Calhoun, actually encourages South Carolina to nullify the law, to nullify the tariff. And South Carolina nicknames the tariff of abominations, because they hated it so much. So John C. Calhoun basically, in so much as gives them permission to go ahead and just ignore or nullify that tariff. Well, if you were the president, how would that make you feel if states are just picking and choosing which laws that they want to follow? And so he says, absolutely not. You're going to have to pay my tariff. And they said, nope, we're nullifying it. And he said, no, you're going to pay it. And then they said, fine, then we're going to secede. We're going to quit your country. Well, Andrew Jackson cannot let the Union start falling apart. And so he says, if you think you're going to secede, no big deal. I'm just going to send federal troops in to stop you. In fact, Congress even supports this decision to send in troops to stop. Okay, and so this is what we call the nullification crisis. And of course, South Carolina backs down and they don't leave the country. But you guys seem to get a little mixed up on the FRQ on the cartoon. So let's take a look at that particular cartoon, just in case you ever see it again. One thing I think a lot of people missed is the compass at the top, which is telling us that the guy on the right-hand side of our photo, the one who looks well-fed and plump, well-dressed, he's from the North. And he's standing right there outside of a domestic manufacturer. I assume he probably even owns that manufacturing company. Then we have the guy on the left. He looks really hungry. He's real skinny. And he's supposed to look less well off. And on his shoulders, he's carrying the heavy burden of tariffs and taxes. And oh my gosh, the compass says he's from the South. And so after you guys had to identify what a protective tariff was, you had to tell me regionally how this impacted the country. Well, it's right there in front of you. The North is positively impacted by tariffs. They own the manufacturing companies. So if people are buying less imported goods and buying more domestic goods, they increase their profits. The southern states, almost said countries, the southern states are negatively impacted. They are still doing business and trading with those European countries, and so protective tariffs hurt their economy. So I hope that clears the issue of the protective tariffs as well as the nullification crisis up. And we've got one more slide, and we'll talk about some Supreme Court stuff, and then we'll be done. Okay, so here we are on our last slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about Andrew Jackson and the Native Americans. So you guys know Andrew Jackson's history with the Native Americans. Of course, in the Adams-Onis Treaty, he was a little harsh with Native Americans. And now, as he's president, that kind of continues. And he decides to enforce something called the Indian Removal Act to basically move all Native Americans in the southeastern portion of the United States to a single piece of land, which, of course, today is called Oklahoma, which was halfway across the country. Now, why? Why did he do this? Of course, he says that this is going to be, for their safety and to benefit the Native American culture. But really, what we're really after here is the farmland. Native Americans were living on valuable, fertile soil, and Andrew Jackson wanted to make sure that that was capitalized upon, of course, because he's from the South, so that makes sense. Okay. So he does the Indian Removal Act to try to kick the Native Americans out of that land. The Native Americans, you guys know, take action and sue. They don't think that they should have to move. They have been going to American schools, living in American homes, learning the English language, and in some cases even trying to basically gain citizenship as Americans. So they sue. Specifically, we have two court cases, Cherokees versus Georgia and the Worcester versus Georgia case. And both times, the same Supreme Court Chief Justice, John Marshall, rules in favor of the Native Americans. And he says, Native Americans, you are absolutely right. You get to stay on your lands, and the Indian Removal Act is actually unconstitutional. Well, you guys know that's judicial review. If somebody does something or passes a law that's unconstitutional, the Supreme Court can take it away. So Andrew Jackson has to listen to the Supreme Court. But he didn't. He completely ignored the Supreme Court's ruling. You guys had a test question. In fact, it was the very last test question about this. And they tried to distract you by a bunch of other answer choices that said a bunch of different actions that Andrew Jackson took after John Marshall ruled in favor of the ruled in favor of the Native Americans. But it's as simple as that. Andrew Jackson ignored the Supreme Court ruling. And he said, if you want to enforce your law, you're going to have to come and stop me yourself. And of course, that leads us to the absolute unfortunate event of the Trail of Tears, where Native Americans are marching towards Oklahoma, and 25% of them die. So I hope that helps you guys get a better grasp on all of the Andrew Jackson stuff that you struggled with on your test. We look forward to seeing you at the retest.